best to address them. So this presentation, as you all know if you received the email, is the Arkansas Valley Conduit Project update on the cost estimate. So this is a normal process. The Bureau does a cost estimate every so often. I wanted to make known that this estimate is an estimate. Obviously, we talk about actual costs. These are not actual costs, these are estimates. The best estimates we have at the moment. Let's see. We're going to talk about the fact that we at the Southeastern District, and I think the participants believe that this project is special. We agree. But when it comes down to inflation, and when it comes down to project cost, material cost, unfortunately, we're not special, and we have all of those costs also. So we'll highlight a lot of those options. We'll notice that the numbers are large and that we have things to take care of moving forward. But the best part is we've had challenges in this project before. I know a lot of you in this room has been involved in this process for the last 25 years. Well, it's a long process, but at the same time, we have pipe in the ground. We're farther than we ever have been before. One of the core portions of this project will go, or this presentation will go over the investment that the district has put into this project, not only the participants, and also the federal government. So we'll be looking at that also. And the overall message is that before we even get going, the district, as well as the Bureau of Reclamation, is committed to this project and moving it forward. So I am going to go on to this part and give you a layout of the presentation. We're going to have first an update on the cost estimate of the enterprise portion of the project. That's the spur and delivery lines. That's referred to as the Southeastern portion, the Southeastern sub-project, or in some cases in publications we've had spur and delivery lines. The second portion we'll go over is the trunk line. That's the reclamation portion of the project. And Jeff will be giving that portion of the project. So with that, and then at the very end we'll kind of talk about how this affects everything, timelines, payments, all of the above, and we'll talk about some next steps that we're looking at doing. So I'll take time to introduce Kevin. Again, he's the ABC project manager, and he's going to summarize the enterprise portion.
Good evening. So my tech guy says to hit unmute. We got all of those here.
Sorry about that, guys. Let's take a technical minute here.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. So I'd like to start by providing you with just a brief overview of the initial cost estimate, because we're going to use that tonight, and Jeff and I will talk about the updated cost estimate, but you'll want to refer back to that as a comparison purposes. So with that, the initial cost estimate for both sub-projects that Leanne mentioned were prepared by Reclamation in late 2019 and early 2020. And that's when Reclamation and the district agreed to take over, when the district agreed to take over the construction and design of the spurs and delivery lines. As you can see on the table in front of you, the total estimated cost for the project at that time was in the range of $564 million to $610 million. And if you say, well, why the range? Well, back at that time, we were wrestling with some construction contingencies and some variances, and so we settled in on a range of costs at that time. There were three main considerations in these estimates. First of all, they were based on a reconfigured project. And when I say reconfigured, early on in the project, when the EIS was done and the feasibility study was completed for the preferred alternative, originally we had the trunk line going around from the west side of Pueblo, around the south end and back up past St. Charles Mesa and tied in on the east end of Pueblo. That was replaced by the concept of bringing water through Pueblo Water's distribution system. And then we added a new 6-mile trunk line segment to actually connect with Pueblo in the Avondale and Boone area. There was also a dechlaramination facility added and some other associated features. Second of all, the costs these costs represent, again, as I said, were from 2019 and 20. The original feasibility study was completed in 2016, so these costs reflected indexing of those original 2016 costs. And then finally, these were still preliminary estimates because in the new configured project at that time, much of it, there wasn't a feasibility level design done, so it was still considered preliminary estimates early on. So with that as a little background for you, I'm going to cover the enterprise spurs and delivery lines and what the updated costs look like. And then Jeff will cover the updated cost for the reclamation trunk line and its associated facilities. So this is a map of the project. The dark blue line represents on here the trunk line, connecting, as I said, from the east side of Pueblo all the way to Lamar. And then the lighter lines, the orange lines and the lighter blue lines are the spurs and delivery lines, which is the district's sub-project portion of the project. And we have, on that part of the project, we have, and by the way, spurs and delivery lines. Spurs are pipelines that connect 2 or more participants to the trunk line. Delivery lines are pipelines that connect only one participant to the trunk line. We have 7 spur lines. We have 39 delivery lines, which strangely coordinates with about 39 participants. Those 2 pipeline totals amount to about 89 miles of pipelines. And the different delivery lines range from just a few hundred feet in some cases to several miles. We also have 2 small pump stations that boost water pressures for a couple of the participants from the trunk line to their systems. But I really like the fact on this pipeline that it is, for the most part, except for those 2 small pump stations, it is a pressure gravity fed system. And that's huge in the ultimate construction of this pipeline and operation of it, because we're not pumping water that distance. So good to keep in mind. So the updated cost for the enterprise sub-project portion of the project is $75 million. That's represented at a base level that we, for pricing, is October of 23, so last fall. And you just heard me mention, or you might have just noticed, okay, let's go back, that the sub-project originally was in the 123 to 134 million. So you might say, oh, so the enterprise sub-projects has gone down over time. That's correct, but there's reasons why that has come down, and I'll just talk about a couple of the main reasons. There's 4 of them mainly. For one, when the district and reclamation, we decided to split the project up, just by the nature of a federal project, we are not subject to all the same procurement rules and regs that the federal government is. So that by itself can save money on a project. We're not subject to Davis-Bacon wage rates and some of the federal wage rates, so that helps. But probably the biggest reason that there was a reduction in cost was we were able to, in working with a lot of you, we were able to revise the delivery points and consolidate a couple of delivery lines in places and kind of make the overall layout more efficient. And that resulted in a decrease in total pipeline length from 113 miles down to 89 miles. So that right there accounted for most of the price decrease. And then finally, we had some data from our local data that allowed us to maybe assume some lower contingencies than what Reclamation has right now. But the cost, we actually did have a little bit of a cost increase from, and as Leanne said, we were hit by inflation. We continue to be hit by inflation. There's design changes that come into play, and there's market trends. I will say that I'm very confident with this estimate where it is right now because last fall, right at the time we were doing this estimate, we were able to bid the Avondale and Boone delivery line projects, and they were right on target in our budget estimates, and we constructed those and completed those. So we have 2 delivery lines in the ground right now. So with that, I'm going to have Jeff come up and he'll discuss the reclamation sub-project and costs and from his standpoint.
All right, thanks Kevin, and good to see you all here tonight. So I know this is probably the first time most of you have seen me, so my name is Jeff Rieger. I'm the area manager for the Eastern Colorado office of the Bureau of Reclamation. So we oversee both the Frying Pan, Arkansas project here and then also the Colorado Lake Thompson up north. Really excited to be with you all here tonight. I'm originally from Colorado, just love seeing the ability for us to put this great project into place here in the valley. So with that, I'm going to get into our side, and you are going to see a pretty significant kind of difference from what Kevin just presented and what I've got, because in contrast to what you see there, our project is, our trunk line piece of this project is significantly different. It's a much larger size of pipe. We weren't able to really change the scope or configuration at all, and so we are still working with a lot of that original estimate. And as you'll see, we've been hit by a lot of cost increases over the last 4 years, which I'll be getting into. I'm just going to put a couple of caveats out there as we get into this. One is that we've got a great team of engineers and estimators up in our offices in Denver that helped put this together. So if you've got questions tonight that I can't answer, we'll be able to get back to you with information that they can provide. And I also do need to share that there will be some discussion later by Southeastern of legislative elements of this project, and that's outside the scope of what Reclamation gets involved in because of the obvious congressional involvement there. So with those caveats, I'll go ahead and get into our estimate. And I'm going to start off with a highlight of the reclamation, the federal side of this project, which is that trunk line, as Kevin highlighted. This is going to be large diameter pipeline. For those who've been up towards Pueblo, you've already probably seen some of it going into the ground, 30-inch inside diameter pipe as we get up there. It'll get smaller down towards the lower end, but still a larger diameter pipeline that generally follows the alignment you see there in kind of the center of the picture in the dark line. It also includes that connection that Kevin and Leanne mentioned to the Pueblo water system, where we're now bringing water through the city of Pueblo to that connection point. What we're calling an injection site. That's basically a water treatment facility that takes chloramines out of the water so that it can be compatible with water systems further down the line, and then delivery So that's basically the federal component of this project. So with that, I'm going to just touch on a little bit of the recent history that kind of set the stage for where our estimates have gone. So as Kevin highlighted, we had an original cost estimate that had been indexed up and modified somewhat from a 2016 estimate. And back in 2019 and 2020, that was the estimate that we were working with as we moved into construction. We obtained our first construction funding from Congress that year, and we were able to move forward with that. At that point, basically, we were working again on a feasibility level design. So when I say that, that's about 15% of the level of design necessary to actually take it into construction. So our first step was to go out, obtain additional information and data on the ground, and then take those designs all the way up to 30, 60, 90, and 100% design. That 100% is what we go out to bid with for our construction contracts. And during that process, we gained quite a bit of additional information about things like our soil makeup, rock, groundwater, things that are underneath there, and a whole lot of additional information about how we might have to adjust the alignment to move forward quickly with construction. At that same time, as everybody knows, we were moving through the pandemic and seeing just a tremendous wave of inflation, construction and material costs significantly increasing. And so with that, when we got to the point of actually issuing our first 2 construction contracts, those did come in a fair amount higher than we originally estimated. And those were trigger points where we realized that the construction cost on this project had likely shifted fairly significantly. And so we did wait until we got the full information from that second contract so that we could have a second data point to really draw from, and that triggered the initiation of a complete reevaluation of the total cost of the project, and that's what I'm going to be presenting here today. So with that, as I think most of you have probably seen in the handouts that were sent out by Southeastern last week, that cost estimate did grow fairly significantly to a grand total of $1.3 billion for the federal side of this project. Breaking that down a little bit further, that is a combination of about $972 million in actual construction costs. So that would be all of those field costs that go into the construction contracts going out, and then about $335 million in what we call non-construction costs. So that's going to be things like obtaining design data as we finish designs all the way down the line, developing those designs, the process of procuring our construction contracts, and then we've got all of our contracted construction oversight and management. Also any land or easement acquisitions that we need to do down the line, as well as environmental compliance activities as we go. Also included in that 335 is the payments that we'll be making to the Pueblo Board of Waterworks for that ability to convey water through the city of Pueblo rather than go around it. And that did represent again a cost savings because we cut out basically 25 miles of pipe that would have gone around, but that's where that cost is captured here. Let's see here. A couple of caveats on this, which you see on the slide there, and what these numbers do not capture is any interest charges during construction, which will become part of the repayment requirement, and also any additional escalation that happens between now and the time that we build future segments of the line. So we've got 2 of the segments underway. We're working towards the next segments, but as time goes, so does inflation or other effects like that. So it reminds us of the importance and the fact that time is of the essence as we build this project. So again, you do see a substantial increase here. However, our folks also wanted to make sure that we were doing our very best to estimate this and compare it to a number of other projects that are now in construction within our agency throughout the West, and it came in pretty comparable to the cost of those. So that's the total. I'm going to dive into some of the details on the reasons for that escalation. As you can imagine, inflation was a pretty big driver of this, but it wasn't the only thing. As I mentioned, we gained quite a bit of new information as we move forward towards construction, both on our site conditions, as well as, changing the alignments, understanding the restrictions we would have on alignments, congestion with other utilities that are underground and so on. And then we also work through refinements of our estimates. So those are kind of the three big categories that I'm going to talk through. And as we'll get into here in a minute, we try to ascribe most of those costs to these different categories, but I'll highlight that there's a lot of overlap between them. And some of the, for instance, the inflation costs are also embedded in those other two categories. So as I go through there, keep those things in mind. So starting off with inflation, as I think we all know, it's been a big factor for all of us in the last 4 years. We've got just some of the highlights of that and how it really affected this project on the screen up there. When you look at the upper left corner, you'll see a chart showing the construction cost index. For the Front Range area here, you can see that after 2020, that really jumped up. It's kind of an index of overall construction. But perhaps a bigger item to focus on is that chart in the lower left that you see there, which is the index of the cost of plastic pipe. So this area has soils that are fairly caustic to metal types of pipe. We would have to put in what they call cathodic protection to essentially keep that metal pipe from corroding. So we focused on utilizing plastic pipe here, but as you can see, like many different pipe types, the cost jumped up, but plastic was particularly impacted by inflation. On the right, you can see, all the other categories of things that have been driven by inflation over the last 4 years, but a pretty significant driver to our cost increase here. But again, that wasn't the only thing. Other things that we have learned over the last 4 to 6 years as we've gotten into construction on this, the soil properties were a little different than originally anticipated, and that affects your design on what kind of trenches we're using, whether it's open trench versus shored trench or actual directional drilling underground. Also right-of-way considerations. We've largely focused on trying to stay in the CDOT right-of-way right next to the highway. That accelerates the project, should keep our need to get into easements with private entities down as much as possible, but at the same time that gives us really tight right-of-ways to work in. An example is up by Pueblo, as you see right now, the first segment there, we're in a really tight right-of-way, so we're actually having to do horizontal directional drilling. So those are some of the considerations there. In addition, we've experienced a whole lot more groundwater than was originally anticipated, as well as rock excavation. So we've now accounted for those in our future designs, and that drives up that cost estimate. Again, highlighting at the end, point out it's an estimate. To the extent that we get further downstream and don't experience those conditions, that'll represent a reduction in what the overall estimate might be as we move forward. And then, of course, there's a few other items I've listed up there. As we refine the alignment, you see the potential for additional trenchless or pavement crossings, a fair amount of congestion, again, with our underground utilities that we're finding out there. As a result of changing over to utilizing Pueblo's system, we did have to add those water treatment features that I mentioned, but at the same time, again, that overall reconfiguration represents a significant cost savings over what it could have been had we gone all the way around town. And with the kind of ever-evolving nature of control systems on a system like this, we did switch over to fiber communication infrastructure, which drove a little bit of a cost increase there as well. And then moving on to that last category of estimate refinements. So these were largely based on what we've learned as we've gotten into the first 2 reaches of pipe, things like our production rates, how fast the pipeline is moving, additional need for traffic control that wasn't originally anticipated, or those tight right-of-ways that is now necessary, and some of the environmental controls that are necessary as we move down for dust abatement, things like that. So those are just refinements based on what we've been learning as we get into this particular project. So those are just general kind of summaries of those three big categories and what's driving a lot of this. Again, we've tried to ascribe kind of percentages to this, but I'll say there's a lot of different ways to look at this. So looking at this slide you see here, we've got 25% ascribed directly to the cause of inflation or directly ascribed to inflation. However, it's worth noting that there are secondary inflation effects in those other two categories. You know, for instance, if we've got a scope change that drives us to need to do horizontal drilling, that's going to be a lot more expensive now than it would have been 5 or 10 years ago. So you see that secondary effect of inflation. So I'll say, looking at this, there is quite a bit more of this that's actually driven by inflation. But again, we're trying to kind of bring these into categories to make sense of it. So that's where you see that inflation there. We've got 53% as a result of those scope changes, and then 22% to the estimate refinements. But similarly, those two categories, there's a fair amount of overlap. So that's basically a high-level summary of where all of this is come from. With that, I'm going to get into my final slide here. Provide once again that grand total new estimate, and I guess I'll just highlight two really important things as I wrap up my section here. The first one, and it links back to what Leanne mentioned at the beginning, this is a cost estimate, and even though the cost estimate has changed, what hasn't changed is our agency's commitment to the project. As Leanne noted, this is a challenge, but we've worked through these types of challenges before, so we'll continue to work through them. And similarly, this is an estimate, it's not an absolute. We expect to see, changes, hopefully cost savings that we can work through as we get through this project. And I would also note that it does represent what we believe to be a pretty conservative estimate. So we have in the range of about 35% contingency added to this, so it's a pretty fair contingency amount. It's based on past experience our agency has had with projects, so it's in there, but worth noting that to the extent that we don't end up needing those contingencies, those costs won't be realized. So with that, I think I've made all the main points that I wanted to, and we'll, as Leanne said, we'll get into questions a little bit later. I'll pass it back over to her.
I'd like to take just a minute at this point and thank Jeff. We've had a lot of participant meetings in the past, and I don't remember one where the Bureau had attended. Jeff came to speak on behalf of the Bureau, and I think that the partnership with the district, as well as the participants, as well as the commitment, is showing tonight. So I want to thank you very much for coming to talk with us and help us with this presentation. So when I first started, I told you that we would summarize the investment in this project. This is a big portion. Since 2020, the Bureau has put $321 million into this project. This is a big investment. I know you all got the participant announcement in April that the Bureau allocated $90 million to this project. That shows a lot of commitment. The breakup of those funds is $71 million in annual appropriations and infrastructure funds of $250 million. The state level with the Water Conservation Board has secured $90 million in low interest loans if they're needed. And we also have $30 million in grants to apply. This portion is for the enterprise portion, the spur and delivery portions, that the enterprise will build and design on behalf of the participants. Local contributions. I think this is one of the biggest notes that you can't go without mentioning. Participants themselves, our 39 participants since 2011, have put in $2 million to this project. That's how important it is. I think everybody in this room understands what kind of money that is. The enterprise funding, our enterprise board of directors has created a fund balance for us to continue and process through this project, they put in $4.8 million. Not all of that is spent. We have a cash flow for that. Also, ARPA. A lot of you, I actually was one of the individuals that met with you in 2021 when we got the ARPA funds. That's the American Rescue Plan Act funds. We had a number of individuals, and I'd like to name them. We had Ordway, which I see Gary here, Los Animas, Lamar, Otero County, Pueblo County, Prowers County, and Bend County that put just around $3 million into the design of the project, and Pueblo County specifically put in enough money to complete the design and construction of the 2 participants within Pueblo County, that's Avondale and Boone. And just to make sure everybody understands that the realization behind that is from the beginning of this project, all the costs are shared by the participants. So when any of those organizations put dollars in, that's less money that we have to go find as in grants and less money that we eventually possibly then have to borrow later. So these are big deals, and I don't want to go without mentioning them. Also want to make mention, I know we've talked about this in the PET participant meetings, we're doing everything we can to leverage funds. We are constantly in contact with CWCB, Rural Development, with the USDA, DOLA, which I know has they all have a very big presence down here, and Water Power and Development Authority. So we'll continue that process. You know, there's 2 big impacts of this cost estimate on the project, and that is the construction schedule and the repayment schedule. Kind of go over the construction schedule first. This is fairly new information, so we have to be able to have time to react to it. And that's why I'm very thankful that we have such a great partnership with the Bureau, because the trunk line will drive the majority of the timeline that we're working with. We have 2 more years of infrastructure funds. We've averaged somewhere between $60 and $90 million a year in those type of funds. Like I said, 2 more years, we're hoping to get funds like we got in April, and that will be very helpful to the project. Then other than that, what we have left is annual appropriations from Congress and in the President's budget. Since 2021, we've averaged somewhere between $8 million and $13 million annually. Right now, we're at $13 million. That number has gone up, and we will fight to increase it as much as we can. And that will be one of our biggest goals. We've shared that with our delegation and also reclamation. And at the point right now, we have across the board commitment. Easier said than done, but we won't stop. On the enterprise side, like I mentioned, timeline works with the Bureau. We will remain with our original plan to try to stay 2 to 3 years ahead of the Bureau so that we're ready for connections and can connect participants as soon as possible. So the impacts on repayment. So as all the participants are aware, the participant per legislation is attributed to the cost of 35% of the project. We've met in the past with participants explaining that per Public Law 11111, miscellaneous revenues generated by the Franklin, Arkansas project will be enough and sufficient to pay the trunk line. With this cost estimate, that's no longer the case. So we're working on some ideas to either administratively extend the period of time to pay the project off, or possibly through a legislative process. That is also something to be seen. We're, like I said, going through lots of different ideas, but the end result is get the project affordable for participants. Also to mention that 35% we get a credit and an inclusion on any of the spur and other programs. So it's a little bit of a calculation, but we'll make sure we communicate that as best as we can with all participants for a clear understanding. Let's see. And like I said, we're looking to leverage any of the possible funding that we can get, whether that's a state funding source, the USDA or something along those lines. So we'll be communicating that process also. As you can see in this meeting, we're trying to do as much communication as we can. And kind of the story of our participant meetings have been, give us the answers. Well, we might not know all the answers, but we're here to help you understand and move forward on the process. Wanted to communicate and share our plan. So our board of directors heard this exact presentation by the same individuals a week ago Thursday. So that is why you received the information to have this follow-up. So we sent that information out so that there was somewhat of an understanding of why we're calling you together. On June 18th, prior to that presentation, Bill Long, myself, and Christine Arbogast, one of our consultants, were in Washington, D.C. We spoke with both Senator Bennett and Hickenlooper. They expressed that they are behind the project. We have their support. We're going to work hard on federal appropriations to increase those totals. And we also spoke with Reclamation Commissioner, and she also provided that this is one of the projects she'd like to see complete, and we have full commitment from her also. Wanted to make sure that, and I just can't say it enough, that, you know, the cost estimate is high, it's large, but at the same time, Jeff is right, it's not an actual cost. And we're going to keep plugging along because we, as well as this room, knows that this is necessary for the valley. Also wanted to take note that over the last few days, as well as into next week, we will also be meeting and giving this same update to the the Colorado Health Department, Water Power and Development Authority, CWCB. We've contacted the governor's office, and like I mentioned, we'll make sure that DOLA and USDA Rural Development has the same understanding in an effort that we are sharing the same information and trying to address questions where we absolutely can. And that really does conclude the presentation that we have. And at this point, if there are... Bill referenced the future communication plan. I'd love to share that. So one of the things that we've done, we haven't had a lot of participant meetings in the past. This will be the first of what I hope. We're not going to pull you guys together when there's not information, because we want to be respectful of your time. But we do believe the more information that you have, the more we can work together to move this forward. What we're doing is creating some type of a report/newsletter. We have a staff building session on that here coming up, and we're going to provide that information to our board of directors monthly. Our board of directors meetings are on the third Thursday of each month. You're able to view that online and or in person. They do happen in the middle of the day. So what we're going to do is make sure that that same information that goes to our board then goes the very next day to our participants. So I encourage you to get on our email list. We have the sign-in sheets. If you sign on the sheet, your email will automatically go on to that communication. If you didn't sign in, please make sure we get your email address so that you get the same updates that our board of directors is getting. And obviously, we have our phone number. You can get a hold of us via email. The worst thing we can tell you is we just don't have the answer yet, but we are all willing and ready to have conversations about this very important project. Good. Well, since that concludes the actual presentation, we'll try as hard as we can to do some questions and answers. And if there are none and you decide that you have one later, that's where that phone call and that email comes into play, so we can meet with you.
What are the different timelines that you guys are estimating?
With this new information, we do not have a revised timeline, but we're hoping over the next 2 to 3 months we will. So as soon as the district is able to work with the Bureau to get that information, then we will actually share that information too. Because then the spur delivery lines will use that information to, like I said, stay 2 to 3 years ahead on the delivery portions for the 39 participants. Hello?
Hi. Approximately how much is the district shortfall on the miscellaneous revenues to pay off that 35%? Is it a large portion or?
It is a large portion, and so one of, like I said, an administrative or possibly a legislative correction would be to extend that payment period to the period where it actually covers the time frame. Dollars cover the time frame is the goal. And so, like I said in the presentation, that trunk line was anticipated to be paid by those revenues, and that's why we're still working hard to get to that same goal. So then the participants are liable for the investment in the spurs and deliveries, as we had stated a year ago. That will take time, and we'll make sure we get updates on the process. Yes?
Well, what's the value of the shortfall? It's a percentage of 35%, but what is that?
Well, it's 35% of the total project, and we have the estimated total project at $1.37 billion,
Sure.
but that's not actual. So really, when it comes down to it, repayment on the contract at 35%, right now, when we started our negotiation process with the repayment contract, which is on hold at the moment because of this information, there was a 50-year repayment period at the completion of the project. So,
And right now, we don't know whether the project is going to be completed in 2035 or what?
that's correct, we don't know the time frame at this minute. We're walking through, the Bureau's walking through the start of some estimations on a new timeline.
But there's a different timeline schedule for the town of
They're a different, I'm sorry,
timeline, like quarterly, probably tapping before, no.
absolutely, there is, the project at one point was looked at as kind of building kind of both ends to the middle. At this point, it is moving from west to east. That is the revised plan.
And then the spurs will come up our county,
Yeah, probably.
and I want to have our anticipated happen might have been 2026 or so. So that could happen in 2026, but the people at the end of the line may not get there till 2035.
It absolutely could, and I don't want to quote any years because we don't have that. But yes, it will go west to east.
Yeah, so awesome in the email list with all the meeting information. Where could we get a copy of like the draft governance agreement that's referenced in the letter and things like that? Like, is there a resource place where we can go and see all these things?
I think it's a great idea to develop an online resource area. We could easily do that on our district website. We'll make sure we share that with participants. And as for the governance, at this moment right now, the governance authority has been put on hold. What we'll have to do is go back to our board, make sure our board understands that process, and that we give the ability to move forward.
And I think all the stakeholders are pretty interested in what that eventually is gonna look like too. So at least I think we would be for sure.
I agree with you. The original thought is to put the control of the conduit within the valley. Can you say the question? Can you see it? Oh, repeat it. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yes, I'll repeat the question before I answer. I apologize. The last question was a depository of information, so there's a resource for participants to go to. So we'll work on that adding that to our communication process. Yeah.
So this is to Jeff. So
Okay.
Jeff, that'd be great, thank you. All right, so my question is, has to do with the cost increase, I think we can all kind of understand, but then you went ahead and you used 2 contracts that were let as kind of, let's call it, you kind of calibrated the inflationary effect. As more contracts are let and more work is accomplished, well, that'll probably be like an intuitive process where you'll use that information to check pricing for materials and labor and equipment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, so, yeah, and go ahead.
I'm just trying to make sure that, like, that's a big number, so basically, it more than doubled. Not a great math person, but I can do 5 times 2 is 10, or 1. So it's more than doubled. My question is, for the participants, we'll be monitoring this closely so that we don't sit here in another 3 or 4 years and all of a sudden it's $2 billion.
Right.
Which we may not have control over, but we really don't want to, we wouldn't want to get there as a surprise, right?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, if I can capture that so that folks online.
Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, so let me repeat it back so that they can hear and also to make sure I've got it right. But basically, you're saying, we've got the 2 contracts that were actually let, and so those kind of give us a price point that we understand, but as we move forward, will we be adjusting as we see things continue to evolve through additional contracts and making sure, that there's again an understanding of how that estimate may change with time in order to know, and also to assure that if it does continue to increase, that, there's plenty of warning and it doesn't come as a surprise. Is that
I think you got it.
Yeah,
Sure did.
Sure, all right, so yes, the short answer is yes. I mean, as we move forward, we'll continue to get additional contracts out, that'll get us additional information. The other thing I would note is that as we get additional design data, design work done, that removes, or either locks in or removes some of the contingency that I mentioned, because some of that contingency is on what we don't know about future segments that haven't reached that advanced stage of design.
Okay.
So yeah, as time goes on, we can certainly continue to adjust, and as Leanne pointed out, we'll be communicating with Southeastern, with everybody that's interested in anything we're seeing, how that's trending, those kinds of things. So yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Sure.
And if I could add to that too, remember one of the fixes, either administratively or through possible legislation, is to have the miscellaneous revenues cover the 35% of the participants, which I understand as the cost goes up, 35% gets larger. But at the same time, if we could write the legislation or the language the way that we choose, that would be either in perpetuity or until that portion of the project is paid. So, like I said, we have some ideas on how to keep this affordable for participants. I want to make that clear.
Yeah, I'll just refine my statement as well. Obviously, so this was a big effort to get to this specific number.
Yes.
So we won't be constantly picking numbers, but, I think where we can help talk about is where things are trending, if we're seeing uptrends, downtrends, and how things are going, and then, periodically, if there comes a point where it makes sense to do a complete reprice, we call this a reprice, complete reprice, we can hit that as well, but I think that's where we would go with it, is showing trends as we move along, but then really, if there's a point where everybody says, oh boy, it got a lot cheaper or got a lot more expensive, and there's a need to trigger another complete reprice, you can certainly hit that. Yep.
Based on this, what you just said. So,
That way so people can hear you.
I'll talk about that. On the 1.3 billion, that cost is today's cost.
Please talk to that so that online can hear you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 1.3 billion cost is today's cost. It's not indexed for any inflation out into any future at all?
That's correct, and I'll be really, really specific, because I think what we've got there is what we're calling October 2023 dollars. So it's a couple months old, but that was a point in time where we captured all of the estimates. So that's October 2023, not indexed forward for what we would call escalation to the notice to proceed. So for instance, if we've got to reach a pipeline, I don't have the map up here, but if we've got to reach a pipeline further down, it won't get constructed till say 2027. There would presumably be some sort of escalationary effect towards that, and so that's not accounted for. That this is today's cost.
And what's your contingency again right now?
Contingency is about 35%, I'll say. There's a couple of elements to that, and we can break that down, but it includes contingencies for design on reaches that haven't yet reached that advanced stage of design. It includes construction contingencies, so those will certainly exist until we finish construction on any particular reach. And then contingencies in our procurement processes, as well as the preparatory work that contractors do once they've secured a contract. So that all sums up to that roughly 35% range.
Dan, perhaps it'd be helpful,
because you mentioned like discussions, and you're kind of alluding, I think, to some future negotiations. You talked about legislation. We know that the district has to have a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation.
The
Is that-
district has a draft
A
contract.
draft contract, which
For the
now,
agreement,
which
which
now
now-
is, abeyance, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of on hold. Okay, so maybe you could be a little bit more specific and speak to what it is you're all hoping to do. Because I think we all understand, like everybody in here probably has a mortgage, or if you're like me, we just borrow ridiculous amounts of money to farm. It's a big difference when you're paying 5% interest versus 8% interest, paying it back in 6 months versus 20 years. Why don't you speak to that a little bit, okay? Because I think there's an element here that I missed. I didn't quite get it a little bit in terms of, you said 15-year payback. Are you thinking that the payback could be longer?
Yes,
Okay.
it could be, and that is one of the elements that we're looking at. So if we are successful, which this is the goal, right now, the estimation is we would have to pay it off in 50 years. If we're successful either with an administrative change and/or a legislative change, and we revise the language to remove the word 50 years and put in perpetuity, there miscellaneous revenues, which are revenues generated from the Franklin, Arkansas project, will pay the majority portion of the 35%, which will then leave only the portion of the participant's cost, which is the spur delivery lines, which is what the enterprise is paying, is which designing and building.
okay, thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
but I do want to caveat that contract that we started negotiating is on hold at the moment. There is no continuation for that right now.
So, that's all right. Oh, okay. So, at $1.4 billion, that's 400 million? About 450 million? That's 35%?
Something like that.
Do we honestly think that we're not gonna sit in this room again between now and the time the pipe gets to Lamar and not have a similar conversation to what we're having right now?
I think that depends on the timeline, and we'll make sure that we are well
Because I don't
talking
think
about
that
it
the
before it
1.4
gets.
is gonna get you.
I anticipate having multiple conversations, and we have talked about it, it's true.
Bureau of Reclamation is probably overseeing about 180 projects in 17 states. I'm sure that varying in scale and price, they're all experiencing the uptick in prices that they're all seeing. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but is the Bureau of Rec going to prioritize any one project so they can complete other projects? Are they going to pick some other than others? Because now we have 180 projects vying for appropriations from each state senators, just like you spoke to Bennett and Heckenberg. 17 other states are doing the exact same thing. It's a finite number, even though it's in the billions of dollars they can print and would just escalate the cost anyway if they're trying to fund 180 projects. So again, would they prioritize projects in the West? Because that wasn't just projects in the West.
Right, yeah, so, and I'm assuming everybody on here that the point was made that our agency as a whole has a wide variety of construction projects underway, particularly with the infrastructure bill that was signed and the funding that we received, and so, you know, might some of these be prioritized to complete them over others? And so essentially, and you mentioned also that, you know, we're seeing these same effects on all projects, and that is definitely true. I mean, those you saw the construction cost indices and whatnot, we're seeing the same trend on essentially every project. So, and you are correct, we've got a lot that are out there right now, but that's where I think we're seeing, you know, the leadership of the agency try to do their best to apply good priority across the board. And so, you know, the best I can offer to answer that is you've seen the priority that's being placed on this by the funding that we continue to receive. And as was highlighted earlier, you know, we're committed to this project. The commissioner has expressed that as well. And so within that overall balance, she's doing her best to try to prioritize this among a pretty wide variety of other things. And we're encouraged by the funding that we have seen for this project.
Jeff, what project of the most recent bill funding, what project got the most, or largest outfit?
Yeah, this one did. So we've got the particular segment of money that this one has been competing for is within what we call conveyance and storage projects. And so this year, this was essentially, I believe, the largest allocation amongst those, because there's a number of other storage projects that are also in that mix. So you can kind of go back, if you want to feel for it, you can look through our press releases that have announced those over the last few years and see what different projects are in the mix there, but we've been doing pretty well there with this project. Cool.
So, it talks about how the revenue is going to arise from the non-fried arc water projects, storage and capacity exchange projects. Can you explain what that means?
So what that is, those are revenues generated by storage contracts in Pueblo Reservoir. So it's not Fried Pan Arkansas project water storage. It is entities that have contracted in Pueblo Reservoir to store their water, and they're charged a fee based on every acre foot that they store. Those funds go to the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bureau of Reclamation holds those monies into an account, and that equals the miscellaneous revenues. The miscellaneous revenues is what I'm referring that will eventually pay off at 35% or a large portion of it.
So it's not coming out of like the town's pocket?
No, that portion is absolutely not. Miscellaneous revenues are Frying Pan Arkansas project generated revenues. And there's multiple of storage contracts. For instance, Aurora has a contract, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, major municipalities for the most part, and there's smaller contracts for smaller entities. Yeah?
You listed 39 participants earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And are those, I mean, I guess, where are we at on committed, signed participants? And we keep hearing possibilities of ins or outs. How does those increase or decrease in participants affect some of us that are smaller water service companies?
That's a good question. Right now, we have 39 participants. We had, as you've seen in the presentation, We had 40, St. Charles Mesa had dropped out, that's why we didn't build the line around Pueblo. That's how we were able to save by using the capacity in Pueblo and starting the construction on Highway 50 and 36 lane, where you all saw the bore going in. We have no indication from any participants at this point that they will be dropping out of the conduit. We send quarterly invoicings, which I think most of you are aware of, per our MOUs that we do have with all the participants. And at this point, our participants are paid up with those dues. Yes, sir.
Thanks for updating us on your cost estimates and everything for the construction. One thing that I think all the participants in the room here have been asking for quite a while now, what is the operational expense going to be to us, and where is the district time frame on getting that information to us?
That's fair. The operational information is a portion. We've spoke with actually our engineers have went out and had meetings regarding water resource and estimated OM&R charges. But actually that is an element of the contract that I mentioned that is on hold. And we'll go through that individually. But there are some fixed costs associated with that, and there are some costs that will be associated with the water that's taken through the pipe on behalf of the participants. So I don't happen to have those estimates in front of me, I apologize, but we can get those estimates that we've already provided to the participants, and we can share those if I can get your information, I'd be happy to send them back out, because we do have estimates. Based on dollars.
That's a key factor for us. We know what the cost is in the construction part, our share, but we need to know how much it's going to increase the water for our customers, and
You're right, that it is an important element, correct?
So in regard to the in or out, I know we're just sitting back observing, gathering information to see what's going on, because I like the conduit as valuable. For us, when I sit there, I'm on the fence for our town and even our county, because when we can barely increase utilities now. We sent out 30 shut-off notices today. We probably had another 30 that we put liens on. And for us as a town, and for our vision of where we want to go, when you put the numbers together and how much we're going to have to increase every home's water, and combine that with the grocery increase, all the increases going on in inflation rates is out of control. It makes us scared to say, hold on a minute, we're going to have good water, but we're going to be a dumb town forever because we can't pay to do any of our own infrastructure. So that concerns me a little bit. And then we're a 60-40 mix. So then what happens to the other 4 entities and to our county? We're going to cut our contribution to the county by 60%. So they're going to take a 60% loss and revenue that they make from the town. And then they're responsible for maintaining our pipeline that goes throughout our entire county. So for us, it's a tough decision. We really need to put numbers together. And I know I had some meetings in Loveland, had some conversations with Samaritan. We're all scared about how is this going to affect us as far as what we can do as a town to operate, try to improve our town, our infrastructure, and the need to raise water $15 a month, $20 a month to the people with the economy. So that's where we're at as a town. We have to really, we're observing, and this stuff, this baseline stuff is good. So we're really kind of concerned for ourselves independently too, as we sit here on all our spurs, now we're going to do this. And for us, we're in pretty good water. But there's some water counties that the health department's going to probably force them to come in. So that's kind of where I am on what are we going to do as a town. So.
Gary, thank you for your comments, and I understand. I've been through the participant meetings before, and I understand that there's a scared element to this. We want to make sure you know the commitment that we have, but at the same time, we're going to provide our participants within our district as much information as we can. You had mentioned infrastructure, and that you don't have money for infrastructure. Me and my team just had a meeting this week that we are going to try to put together a funding mechanism for infrastructure for the participants, some type of a toolbox that we can share with the participants that says, this is some of the funding out there, this is how you might go about to get it. Let us help you drive in this direction, and hopefully we can help with some of that. That's something I think we've had thoughts on in the past, but we're going to take that leap to try it out.
And for us, we need to, I don't think we're comfortable making the decision just as a council. We want to have public input, and that's where we may need you to come to our community meeting, and because you're going to have a better chance of presenting it so they understand it than us out here saying, well, this is what we want to do, this is how it affects us.
And I absolutely agree, and I'm gonna try to be the best cheerleader I can for this project because I believe in it for the valley, and if I can go to your committee meetings or your board meetings, I'd be happy to.
Can you elaborate on why this contract is on hold?
And the contract is on hold because there's elements of the repayment and the timeline and all the above, and we want to make sure that we have this information out, that we're touching the participants, our board of directors is comfortable. There's a number of elements to the contract that we want to make sure in place before the final negotiations.
This is Kevin Lindell with Eureka Water Company, and we are in the process of becoming a water authority. And I noticed on page 2 of your email that we got, the strategic aims include, and this maximizes the number of private water companies. My question is, how many water companies are looking at doing this? And are you coordinating with those water companies? And then I'll finish up the kind of why I asked that question. We actually had our first water authority meeting Tuesday night. We passed several resolutions. I just got an email. We have a EIN. So we're working through that process to become the water authority. We're spending a lot of money to get this done. So my concern is, are we gonna build a template so that these smaller water companies can follow that template and streamline the process? And I'm not getting any input from you folks. I have been talking to Kim Crawford and Elmer, with the other law firm. But so far we've had 2 different law firms that we're engaged with, and I kind of scares me. I tell people, don't talk too long. They get $400, $600 an hour depending on who you're talking to. So my real concern is, are we going to be able to streamline the process? And smaller water companies, I just don't see them being able to afford to make that transition. So anyway, I'll let you answer those questions.
Well, absolutely. I applaud you for looking into the authority and moving forward. As you're aware, just to make sure everybody else is in the room is aware, moving to an authority gives your organization the ability to apply for grant and more loan forgiveness than you would get if you were a private company. So that really is one of the biggest avenues for doing that. I applaud you. I know South Squeak is walking through that process. I think there's a few others. What organizations, how many are walking through versus choose and want to in the future? I agree with you. We do need to have a template process. I do constantly speak with Ontario County. We have commissioners and Amy herself that are champions for Ontario County specifically. They work really well with the water providers and trying to put together that template. And the district is absolutely always in support. Like I said, we're talking constantly, and I believe that would be a great toolbox to create and or help finish off. Absolutely.
Yeah, Kevin, do you
private entities that convert to the water authority, it benefits them directly, yes, in their costs, but it also benefits everybody on the conduit. In that, for the spurs delivery lines, those costs are shared by everybody in a proportionate way. So if you're La Junta or if you're Ordway, you benefit too from those entities converting to a water authority.
And you can reference the ARPA funding, the example of public county design and construction that assisted the overall process. Everybody will benefit from that process.
What she said. The ARPA money that we received, that was used in Pueblo County's case to fund the Abigail design and construction. And that resulted in zero cost to everybody that's participating in the conduit on those two projects. So it's a team effort.
And just as a reference of that, Avondale and Boone lines were $1.2 million for design and delivery. So that's $1.2 million, even though we saw the $3 million total, that we will not have to borrow, finance, all the above. That work is done.
Can you elaborate on how, like South Swing becoming an authority benefits the municipalities when we're essentially, by becoming an authority, we're essentially becoming a governmental entity. So that increases the number of governmental entities competing for that bucket of money. So can you elaborate on how the municipalities will benefit?
Well, I think it allows you to apply for monies that you wouldn't be able to apply for otherwise. It also allows you, in some cases, depending upon the funding that you're going to apply for, it allows you a higher rate of loan forgiveness, which means part of the loan you don't have to pay back. It essentially becomes a grant.
So how does that benefit the city of La Junta?
It depends where those monies are used. So if you're doing it to increase your infrastructure in your system, it does not. If we use that aspect on the spur and delivery lines, which we are using some of those aspects, it helps all the participants. Those are some of the funding avenues we're using.
It reduces the cost of the overall payment for the spurs and delivery lines.
Right. Okay.
If you get free money, because we're all in it together.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions? So first, again, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. One point I want to make. You have one single question is extremely important. What's this going to cost? We intentionally have not asked you to sign any agreements. And we won't ask you to sign any agreements until we can answer that question to your satisfaction. It's that simple. As you know, the Bureau is constructing now, and we do not have a contract for repayment with the Bureau, but we do have legislation from 2009 that the Southeast District pursued prior to 2009, and what's the legislation, 11-111? Prior to that, the miscellaneous revenues just went back to the federal government. We got legislation, Senator Bennett introduced it and carried it, that took the miscellaneous revenue dollars that were going directly back to the federal government to use for our benefit. And again, Leanne pointed this out, but that's for storage of non-project water. So Carr Springs and places like Aurora are helping pay for this, or helping with the repayment of this project. So once again, I want everyone to understand this, make it really clear. Our goal, and keep in mind the legislation we got passed, diverting revenues that previously went to the federal government, we're now pursuing, as Leanne mentioned, a legislative fix or an administrative fix that will continue to use those miscellaneous revenues until our share of the trunk line is repaid. That will not be part of your monthly bill. It will be the miscellaneous revenues that are generated to repay that 35%. So it's really important. And again, We have not asked you to sign anything and we're not going to. One other thing before we adjourn. A couple of years ago, I believe it is now, we sent out information regarding forming a larger authority. And maybe it doesn't need to be an authority, but I think the initial proposal was well received by some and not received so well by others. But I will say, sometime in the near future, not only next week or even next month, but sometime here in the relatively near future, we need to get together and talk about how collectively we as beneficiaries of the project, how it will be operated. And we'll always have a relationship with the Southeast District because it's a bureau project, the main trouble. But we really need to start talking about how we think it would best serve our interests. And if we have good board members, Bub and Lois here, Kevin's here, but we really need to hear from the operators. So at some point, hopefully in 24, we'll be sending something out to you folks so we can get back together so we can start that conversation again about how does this really work for us in the best and most efficient way. And we need to hear that from you. We don't want to dictate that to you. So I just wanted to lay that out there. It's not a big emergency. We have other issues we're working through. So if there aren't any other questions, again, we really appreciate you. Oh, we do have one more. One thing before you ask that question. So you know we have a new executive director. So her goal, and she's already said this too, and it's important for our board. There will be a board report regarding Arkansas Valley Conduit every single month. You'll get that same report later that day or the very next day. Sometimes the reports might be quite large, and sometimes there might not be so much to them. But as long as construction is going, we'll at least have something. But we'll need to keep you updated on where we are on a variety of finance issues and repayment issues with the Bureau and our legislative or administrative fix who we're talking about.
So the question actually came from what you just said, and it's about the 35% and not signing anything until we know. So in terms of the 35%, is it possible that that money could still, what happens to it after the debt is repaid, I guess is what I'm asking. So after that, do those revenues then revert back to the Bureau of Reclamation, or could they stay within the enterprise and then be used to offset maintenance costs?
So the question is, what happens if it is repayment to this stage, whatever? We have an answer. I don't know if we have an answer.
And I have one more question.
We don't have an answer to that, but those revenues do not come back to the enterprise, our board.
Gotcha. So,
Unless we get additional legislation.
Additional, yes.
Yeah.
The way that it sits now.
What was that?
sorry. So the other question is, you mentioned not signing any contracts until everybody knows. You guys aren't asking for that, and I think we all appreciate that. But Valor is where we're from, so we're pretty close to where the pipeline is getting to at this point. And we're wondering about the cost of operations, just like what has been mentioned here. And as that gets closer, so nobody's gonna come to us and ask for a spur line to be installed, or a delivery line, I guess it would be called, to be installed until we have all of those costs of the actual costs of the water pinned down and everything, right?
In order to receive water, we will have to have the commitment that you're in the conduit. But I go back to Avondale and Bloom, which both have delivery rights in place waiting for the trunk, and we have not walked through a contract with them yet. I don't want to tell you contracts will not be required, because they will. It's something that we are not asking for now until we get a good grip on exactly what's going on, and we can ensure that it is affordable for the participants.
Thank you.
So on the spurs of delivery lines, we are working on several different avenues that really reduces the repayment obligation to this group. So, and that's our goal. Zero repayment is probably not realistic, but very low repayment obligation is likely. likely if we continue down the path we're on today. You know, this is complicated stuff. And those of you who've been coming for 20 years know it hasn't been easy. There was one more question.
Could you give us an email address to address you in case you don't get our email from our thing?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
Email address to get to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We have a general email address and I'd be happy to share mine also. So, oh, absolutely. It's info@secwcd.com. And you can always grab that off our website too. It's info@secwcd.com. And mine and all of our staff is our first name and then @secwcd.com. So obviously mine's Leanne, Leann.
Okay, thank you. Now here's a question. I hate being ignorant, but I am. I don't understand, I wasn't a proper meeting to understand the topography. Okay, I don't know why we are not taking water from the dam and putting it in the pipeline instead of having it processed and then unprocessed to get down the pipe. Could you explain that?
Yeah, if you can explain the injections.
Yeah, I'll repeat that question. See, the question is why not taking it directly from the dam and instead running it through Pueblo system?
Well, just taking it where it goes to the Pueblo system and bypassing their processing and just putting it in the pipeline.
So we, effectively, obviously, so the dam is clear over on the very far left of the map here. Original plan, like I mentioned, was, I think Garrett, was to swing all the way around south and then back up. Getting it through town and avoiding their process would require basically new lines because, I think their process plant is over towards the west side of town there, And basically, at that point, just taking that filtered treated water through town, through existing infrastructure, was by far the easiest and most efficient way to accomplish getting it through, recognizing that at the other end, as you point out, an additional treatment process has to be added in to make sure that we're compatible with downstream systems and not producing disinfection byproducts as it moves further down a pretty lengthy line. Does that help make sense?
Yes, I didn't know where the processing plant was. I presumed it was on the east side of town. That's not the case.
Yeah, no, and so at that point, we are picking up fully treated water, but again, to make sure that we don't end up with things in the line that we don't want further down, we have to add that additional treatment. I would say, in this, I can use that as a launch point to highlight. I mentioned earlier, we're doing everything we can to try to keep costs down. So our agency does what we call value engineering from time to time when we see opportunities to improve something. That was a good example of that. So originally, the game plan was to have a full-blown treatment facility there with above-ground tanks that would have residual time in them for the chemicals to do what they needed to do. We were able to optimize that by basically doing, again, what we're calling this injection site, where we're actually directly injecting the chemicals into the pipeline and using that transit time through the pipeline to actually accomplish the same goal with a pretty significant cost savings. So that came out of one of those value engineering processes. And we're doing now is all the way down the line on other elements of it to try to find those pieces of cost savings. If we can say 10 million here, 30 million there, and those should add up as we continue to see opportunities.
Thank you. Gary, I would add to that at the time, that was $180 million more expensive than what we chose to do. So it saved $180 million. If we double it like everything else is double, it's even more than that. Plus, it was about 10 years to get through or around Pueblo. Added 10 more years to what we're doing now. So it just didn't turn out to be viable, at least in our. Any other questions? So you also need to know you're all welcome, and sometimes they're good, energizing, and sometimes they're quite district meetings are the third Thursday of every month. You're always welcome to join us. We have Arkansas Valley Conduit committee meetings that are posted on our website, and you're welcome to join us on those as well. And all of our the public meetings are available by Zoom as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so our committee meetings are available by Zoom as well.
And they're all, we have a calendar on our website which provides when we're having meetings with an agenda and a link to those meetings, so you're welcome to join anytime.
So if you walk out the door and these folks are gone and you think of a question, please get it to us. We want to try to answer it. And again, thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thank you all for coming.